So this is a presentation, and there's a lot of charts, so I'm only going to use up my time. But basically, this is the second book. I brought 40 books down here, by the way, and I sold them all, okay? And some other people had to get them off the web, okay? So I'm glad to see that somebody's interested, and I thought the second book I published really goes through all the 1980s and development of all these aircraft and everything associated with it. And I was a little late in getting it out because I saw what was happening with future vertical lift, you know, and things like the FLRAA, and then I saw the problems with FARA. So instead of just finishing with, you know, the Blackhawks and the Apaches and the AHIP and the CH-47, all the things that I was heavily involved in, I said, somebody's got to look at, at these new aircraft and see how the hell they're going to be done and how they're going to be traded off. So that became an important part. All of my books are kind of memoirs. So they're family oriented. If you read the first book, it's about my family growing up. That's my wife over there on the right, and my two oldest, my daughter and my son. And that's General Story Stevens. Now, there was a golden age for Army aviation. It was when the Aviation Research and Development Command was put in place in 1977. Unfortunately, it became AVRADCOM. I was at the right place at the right time, okay? I was a captain at the time, and all of a sudden they opened up this Aviation Research and Development Command with a lot of positions, higher positions. So I got promoted to major, and I ran the aeromechanics. And then July 1st of that year in '78, I decided I was going to go to the reserves. Because I was supposed to, I got my doctorate at Washington University, and I was supposed to go teach at West Point. But I talked to them, and I said, well, they said, you can be a MOBDES. So 2 weeks a year for 15 years, I'd go up there and teach. And what a MOBDES does is they bring people in. There's about 4 or 5 in different departments. And what happens is if a war is going on, then the people that are the military instructors, they go to the war, and you go up there and teach. I thought, that's not too bad of a deal. I've been in the war before, okay, so that's part of it. So that worked out. But the nice thing about it is that I saw this opportunity, and I'm not bragging, but I went from a captain to a major to the equivalent of a 2-star general in 3 years, okay? Because I became the director of advanced systems, you know, and so I got promoted to what was called an SE level 3, which is equivalent to major general. Now I stayed in the reserves, and I was a lieutenant colonel. And there's a little interesting story because when I became an SES, there were Fort Leavenworth, you know, was where they have the Combined Arms Center, and they do all the gaming and everything else. And the guy who oversees SESs in the Army Material Command at the time, he said, Dan, he said, I need you to go out there and fill that chief scientist position. He said, you're the only guy that knows the technology and everything else, but you also have the background. So for 6 months, I would drive over there during the week. It's kind of interesting because you may have heard of Colin Powell. Colin sat in the desk next to me. I was the 3-star general. He was supposed to be a combined arms general, but he was very pro-artillery, and I'd been in artillery, okay? But I got to know Caden real well, and I got a little side story in one of my books because we would go travel together, and we went to the Fort Eustis area down there, and he was a brigadier general, and even though I'm a lieutenant colonel in the reserves, I was equivalent to a 2-star general. So they give me better quarters than him. So I said, no, I said, you take the better quarters. I said, I'm only a lieutenant colonel, even though my rank was, was equivalent to a 2-star general. So it was a very interesting time, and then I was in charge of advanced systems. We started LHX program at that time. But I've been involved in everything, you know, from the Blackhawks to the Apaches to the OH-58 Kiowa Warriors. Frank Harris and I would really work together on that. The thing that we did so well when I was there, the government and the industry worked together to solve problems. They don't do that anymore. I don't know if they don't have the technical talent in the government or what it is, but the Comanche was a disaster, guys. It went for years and years with a bearingless main rotor that was unstable. And I don't know where in the hell the Army technology force was, but somebody sure went in and got the damn thing fixed, because it turned out that it's like when gross weight goes up real high and it becomes not feasible. It's happened again on their FAR aircraft. supposed to be 10 or 12,000 pounds, ended up 20,000 pounds, and now it needs 2 engines instead of 1 engine. So I wanted to, in that book too, I show an example of how to do those kinds of trade-offs, because it's a very important part of it. So I'm going to kind of flip through this. It's a presentation outline that's too long. This is something that Mike Hertzberg came up a while back, and it was kind of nice because it shows the generations of aircraft. And I modified it a little bit to make it more Army aviation systems as well. But you can see, so I was heavily involved in what's called the second generation. Well, I was heavily involved with the first generation because I was flying these things in Vietnam, but you know, Hueys and Cobras and all that kind of stuff. But so that's a second. The third generation here was kind of the Big Four program, development of the Black Hawk, the Apache, the CH-47D, and the OH-58D. And I was the dynamics vibrations engineer. I was the troubleshooter. If there was any problem, I was out there sent by the PMs and by my boss, Charlie Crawford, to go out there and help figure out how to solve that problem. And I got all kinds of great awards from the program managers. But that system must be broke down today, because I don't see the industry, you know, the government and the Army particularly, I don't see the engineers working together. The thing I'm most proud of is the Apache. The Apache would have been dead if it wasn't for guys like Ken Amer and Jim Neff, but I had a big influence because we had just gone through, they went to a T-tail, if you remember what the T-tail looked like. And that got rid of, if you have a fixed horizontal stabilizer and you accelerate and the rotor wash hits it, the nose goes like this. And Sikorsky, they couldn't live with that, you know, the Army couldn't live with that. So they made a stabilator out of it, you know, a moving tail. So they got it programmed so as a wake hits, you know, it goes through this. The other problem the Black Hawk had, it had a 42 square feet horizontal stabilizer, which was way too big. But we'd given them some very stringent handling qualities, stability and control requirements, and that's why it was so darn big. So what happens is the Apache with the T-tail was not going to make it. They made a T-tail because they did small helicopters that way. But the problem there is when they got to high-speed flight, the whole tail was shaking because of the 4-per-rev off the main rotor wake. And it was shaking and the loads were so high, you know. And the position out at Hughes at the time, at the President, they said, no, we fixed it. We did it on the little 500s, you know, and the T-tail works. But they didn't understand the problem, because when you got to 130 knots, the 4-per-rev off the main rotor was shaking its tail so bad. One of the Army test pilots said he was supposed to go and test it out, and he talked to the test pilot, Bob Ferry. He said, you sure that's okay? I'm looking up there and this hotel, the tail's going like this. So what happened was that we had some engineers. By that time I was chief of structures and aeromechanics, so I had the engineers. And we had worked closely with Sikorsky, so we knew how the stabilator was. There was a group, you know, Ray Prouty and Ken Amer and those guys, they had really a great team. They only had one electrical engineer. So they were scared to death to make this a moving tail. So, I mean, they just didn't have the expertise. So we went out there. I think I spent 6 months out there off and on with these engineers. And in 6 months, we turned that program. The Apache was going to be canceled, okay? In fact, Ed Brown, General Ed Brown was the program manager. And he depended on me a lot, and he said, that's going to be a problem. I said, that's a problem that's got to be fixed. So he said, put together a team. So I got experts from NASA and everything else. They looked at the problem. I showed them what the problem was. They said, yeah, they got to make it a moving stabilator. So there was a big meeting out there in Culver City, and the president of Hughes Helicopters there, and their boss Suma was there, and General Brown. If you ever knew General Brown, he was quite a character. So anyway, they're out there at this meeting, and he didn't tell them that he had this special team, that, you know, independent assessment of it. And the president of Hughes kept saying, oh, we're going to fix it, we're going to fix it. And General Brown said, I want you to go outside. And the president of Sumer, they fired the president, okay? Because basically they were going to do it. But the Apache, I feel so proud of the Apache, because there wouldn't be an Apache today. Now, Charlie Crawford, who we worked for, said, oh, we'll just use an armed Black Hawk. And they were ready to kill the Apache program, which would have been a mistake. Apache came out to be, you know, probably the best attack helicopter in the world right now. But solving that problem, in addition to getting rid of this T-tail up here and moving it down, first of all, we didn't do the 42 square feet that they had on the Black Hawk. We got it down to 32 square feet, you know, just so it's size-wise. But it allowed them to increase the diameter of the tail rotor and increase the vertical fin. So it was a chance to prove it, and that's how the Black Hawk, I mean the Apache, made it. But it was ready to be canceled. So I'm very proud, you know, that we saved the Apache program, because it turned out you don't want one helicopter trying to do everything, you know, that part of it. So I'm going to go through this fairly fast. This is just the thing he was trying to read off. Okay, I tried to summarize it by books, but there's a lot of stuff to support that, but it might be in the paper. Now, so there's 3 books. Some of you knew Tom House too. A lot of you didn't. Anybody know Tom House? Yeah, Tom and I were really close. When I was still a captain, we were downtown in St. Louis. Tom used to come down from Fort Eustis. And if the Cardinals were playing a baseball game, we were only about 3 or 4 blocks away, so we'd walk down and watch a Cardinal baseball game. But Tom was a great guy. Unfortunately, in 1983, 84, when they start putting the readiness back with the research and development, all the top guys left. You know, Dick Lewis, who was the deputy director, Dean Borgman left. All these people were left because their theme, when they put it in 1984, they said, readiness is immediate and development is, what do they say? And development is eventual. Well, what the hell do you mean when it's eventual? Is there an end to this eventual? Well, as it turned out, there was like 30-some years before Bill Lewis at least got it started back. There was an Army aviation development for 30 years. I mean, yeah, they modernized things in that. That's how pathetic it is. And so that's why I spell that out in the book in quite a bit. So anyway, that first book was about my experiences in Vietnam and everything. And then this was second book, which is finished. I finished this one just lately. And then the third book's going to be about my 35 years at Georgia Tech. And that's a big one. I got guys, Emery sitting here in the front. I got a lot of these guys that were research engineers. Got another guy sitting back there with his uniform on. He's been involved. So we had a lot of guys. One of them ended up being Chief of Staff of the Army, General Jim McConville, if you remember him. He was one of my students, and when I got ready to retire, he gave me this big plaque and flew down to Georgia Tech. And there's a video of him on my website if you want to look at it. He said I was the best professor he ever had. And he said, what you really did for me was when I'd get in these meetings with industry or in the Pentagon, they had a problem and they claimed it was rocket science. He said, not rocket science. You know, he knew how to handle that part of it, and that really worked out well. So anyway, these are the 2 books that were published. I've got that simplest website anybody's ever had, right? DanielSchrage.com. Does anybody have a website? My editor and his daughter, who does the website in the book, she said, I was surprised that's available. You know, I don't know if anybody, I guess it's a combination of names, but there's that part. So anyway, the one on the bottom here, some of you may know, I played basketball quite a bit. If you follow basketball, there's a coach named Bobby Knight. Anybody ever hear of Bobby Knight? Maybe not. Mike Krzyzewski, Coach K. Well, we played together, and I think this is, which one's the arrow? Oh, okay. Whoops. Which one is it?
The arrow, this one to the right.
Yeah, but where's the light on that?
The right there's the.
The middle one.
Yeah, middle one.
The middle one, okay.
The little red.
So I just want to, like I said, there's a lot of stuff in this book and all the lessons learned and everything. Over the years, I've given some of this, especially with respect to the Black Hawk and the Apache. But I wanted to show you that I had a lot of mentors and a lot of people. These are the real pioneers in the Vertical Flight Society. I mean, you look across here, Nikolsky, you know, the Nikolsky lecture that I was fortunate enough, we've been fortunate enough to do that. Robin Gray and Al Pierce, Al Gessau, okay, Pat Curtis at Princeton, Hank Velkoff at Ohio State, Barney McCormick at Penn State, Bob Lloyd, both at RPI, and then he came to Georgia Tech. I'm hoping, I'm trying to contact Bob Lloyd. If anybody knows how to contact him, let me know. because I know his wife passed away. Bob was a great guy. Yeah, we all know that. Dave Peters, he's usually at these things. He was my doctor when I got my doctorate at Washington University in St. Louis. He was my advisor. He had worked out at NASA Ames with the guys out there. I think there's a guy named Inder Chopra in here somewhere. I don't know. Oh, yeah, he's the guy in the front. I don't see Ed Smith. Is Ed here? Ed's not here. Yeah. And then down here, I go from Igor Sikorsky. Bob Lynn was the vice president of engineering. I think many of you might have known him. I don't know if you knew it, though, that he studied under Nikolsky. Okay, and Robin Gray studied under Nikolsky at Princeton. Okay, so there's all kinds of tie-ins and linkages that you go. Ken Grenna, you come to know him, it was at Boeing. Ken Amer, vice president of engineering, like I said, these are really good guys. Bill Paul, some of you might have knew him, and Ray Leone, all right? This one right here, side one, right?
To go to the next one, yes, right there, but you got a point kind of.
Oh, okay. Now here's some more people. There's a young guy from the second from the right. I don't recognize him. He looks too young. I think it says Bill Lewis, but that couldn't be his picture because he doesn't look that way anymore. But anyway, that's Charlie Crawford. Charlie Crawford was a mentor for me. Anybody that knew Charlie Crawford, he was a guy. We got along great until I got promoted to be the director of advanced systems, and he had the development qualification, you know. And when they put the AvRadCom back into Aviation Systems Command, I was supposed to be the tech director of this new combined command. And I got thinking, I know Charlie really wants that position. That's one reason I went to Georgia Tech, you know, because Charlie was Mr., you know, he's called the father of the Black Hawk, not only by the industry, Sikorsky, you know, because what he contributed to that. Some of the other guys, Paul Fordink is not here, but if you know Paul, he's really a great historian. He was a good Army officer as well, but he usually is here all the time. He's got a bad back. I offered him my bedroom. I had 2 beds in it, but he just couldn't make it up here. And then these are some of the generals. This guy right here was really a mentor for me. He was really a mentor for Bill Lewis. Bill was his aide down at Fort Rucker at one time. But he was the first director of Army Aviation. Now the funniest thing about these generals, they were in the same units in the Mekong Delta that I was in. But I was there like 2 years later. You know, like they were there for the Tet Offensive. And if you read my first book, he saved 3 airfields during the Tet Offensive. He was a commander of the 121st Soc Trang Tigers, and they had a gunship platoon, you know, flying Hueys, gunships and everything. And they basically kept the Soc Trang airfield from being overrun. And what happened next, though, was he got a call from Canton, said, you got to get to Vinh Long. They're overrunning the airway there. So he went to Vinh Long and saved that airfield. And then he saved Canton. All of these things he did. He deserved the Medal of Honor. I tried a few years to get it, but it was kind of hard for him. General Lauer is an interesting guy. He was a UTAS program manager when they were developing the Black Hawks and that. And one of the stories I've got to tell is that I was going to a 1-week advanced air elasticity course out at UCLA. Fritz Friedman was there, you know, Fritz. And it's a Monday, and I get a call from Charlie Crawford, and he said, one of the Black Hawks is down at Fort Campbell. He said, you got to get there as fast as you can. So I took the red eye from LA to get to Nashville, and I show up there, and General Lauer's there, a 2-star general. He's got a couple colonels with him, another brigadier general, and I walk up and he said, Dan, I'm glad you're here. And then they found out I was a captain. I was in civilian clothes because I'd been at the short course. And General Lauer turns to me in front of these guys and said, Dan, I want you to go through every inspection they're going to make because they're going to want to fly this helicopter out of, it cut down about 30 pine trees. You know, it was a night-type mission. Nobody got hurt on it. One guy bruised his knee. But the thing was, so I went through for 2 days, we went through every inspection because you have sudden stoppage of the tail rotor and all this kind of box. So we got all those changes made, okay? And then Sikorsky flew it out, and guess where they flew? They flew right by the Boeing ship. You know, it was there. Because, you know, the Boeing thought that Sikorsky had lost it because they had this crashed aircraft. So I thought after being there for a week and doing all this stuff, I could go back to St. Louis. The problem is Charlie says, no, you got to get on an airplane, go up to Connecticut and help them fix the problem. What they had is they had put a swept tip on because you needed a swept tip for it, and there was a butt joint between this and there. And so what happens is the blade started delaminating because moisture got under there and started peeling off the blade, and that's where the vibration's so bad that the pilots they thought they were landing on a field, and it turned out to be about 40 pine trees, okay? So I had to go up there. It wasn't that hard of a fix because what we could do is we could put something under and fill that void in there. But I spent my weekend. So about a week later, I get home and my wife said, "When the hell have you been for a week?" I said, "Well, I was in Los Angeles for there. I went to Fort Campbell, then I went to Connecticut." And so Ray's a guy, a really good guy. And Ed Brown, Ron Andreessen is another guy. He's still around. He's really a good guy. He was a program manager for AAH and LHX program manager. Sam Cockerham, another guy who flew in Vietnam in the same units I did. Ed Brown was the real character. He was the guy I told you about. They told him to fire the head of helicopters because they wouldn't change it to a T-tail. So there's that part. But General Story Stevens is a really interesting guy because Aviation Research and Development Command, he was the only commander. He'd gone to Georgia Tech, guy's undergraduate, guy's graduate, so he was technically, he was competent, And so what we did, and I've got a little quote back here when he retired. Right here, this is worth reading because it's his words when he retired. And it's a roadmap that the Army forgot how to follow, okay? Because it said, I was fortunate enough to get the command. The first thing we decided to do was to set up a new directorate. It was called the Directorate of Advanced Systems. And this was the organization that would essentially pool the programs together over the year, establish the priorities that would interface with TRADOC and the Department of the Army, and would directly with the combat developers at Fort Rucker. And second, in fact, we got the whole community pulled together very well. I think they all had, about second year, we were setting our priorities with TRADOC, the Training Doctrine Command, Department of the Army. So when we went in for the aviation side of the house, we knew exactly what priority was in our program. And this gave us an advantage over the other guys, the tankers and everybody else, because they had not done it yet. It worked well regarding the funding of our program. Now there's some bad criticism here about the Army labs, because what he said is the other thing we did was sit down and draw up an R&D plan, okay? And he said, we spent some time the first year looking to see what we needed to do. At that time, money was getting short. For a long time before this, you could have little pet projects. The laboratories could do their things and pursue them. And perhaps if a real breakthrough came, they would be great. But if it didn't, that was okay too. They were doing their own thing. There were some things they'd been doing for years in laboratories that just kept on getting funding for and weren't getting anywhere. So we decided to look at the whole thing and just do the important things to the program. This program we are looking for was the development of the new family of air vehicles. This led to the concept development of the LHX family of aircraft, which ended up with the Comanche aircraft, okay? And this is sort of the model that Bill, in what, 2013 or something, Bill, when he was down at, he was named, it wasn't the Director for Advanced Systems, it was the Aviation Development, Army Aviation Development Directorate. But he started the program, that's why there's a FLAR now, and there's supposed to be a FAR and everything, because somebody started that. So anyway, I'm gonna keep going here. So they broke up the aviation into two things. RADCOM was the research and development, and the other one was, the problem was with the readiness commands, they didn't have any technical expertise. They couldn't solve any problems. All the talent, was on that side, the engineering side. And so that's why they had to put it back together, because they had all these field problems. And then they also formed what's called PEO Aviation in the late 70s. That was a mixed bag, but that was supposed to be responsibility for cradle to grave. The problem is nobody in the program management office knew anything about the cradle. and so that was one of the problems we had there. So I'm gonna go through a few more just for your interest. This was Dean Borgman was another guy some of you may know, and he had it for the Director of Advanced Systems from 78 to 80, and then I had it from 81 to 84. Okay, that's when we started LHX and everything. This is Dick Carlson, some of you know him. He was really a good guy at Ames, and before that he worked on the Cheyenne program and everything else. Dick Lewis, I don't know if you ever knew Dick Lewis. He kind of disappeared too, but we're tracking him down. Charlie Crawford passed away. I got a good story about Charlie if you want to hear it. He passed away. His family lives in Atlanta. And so Charlie left the Aviation St. Louis and came to Georgia Tech Research Institute. And he had another second career where he helped the Special Ops Air Force forces down there. And like he did the airworthiness qualification safety for the Army, he did it for these Air Force Special Ops down there. But he passed away, and the funeral, his kids, he's got like he had eight kids. And basically they said, we want to have a helicopter fly over the burial site. You know, like when he's being buried, they wanted a helicopter to fly over. So I'm calling up the National Guard, and they said, well, we were trying to get a Black Hawk. And they said, well, he wasn't a pilot, you know, or something. So they wouldn't do that. Well, then I went back to the general I showed you that was the mentor, that Bill was an aide for him. And it turns out another aide was running the rebuild facility south of Atlanta. And they had Hueys, okay? So we get a Huey, and I'm using my phone, and I'm in a church, and you know, they're moving the casket to the graveyard, and I'm trying to keep track of where the hell this helicopter is on my phone. My iPhone wasn't like it is today, you know. So anyway, I'm out there in the cemetery trying, because, you know, they're going through the ceremony, and I hear this helicopter, and I say, oh my God, they're going the wrong direction, you know. So I try to call. So I turn back over here, and they're all there, you know, they're about ready to put the grave in the ground, and, you know, all the family and everything there. And the Huey flew right over the graveyard, and everybody applauded. Have you ever been to a funeral where everybody applauded when they were putting down the body? I mean, there's some stories like that I mix in to these books that were kind of unique, I think, because they had some things to it. Well, the reason we had to do this and form that Directorate for Advanced Systems, you see the yellow in there. You see, we needed to ramp that up for the LHX program, to do the flight programs that we had to do. And that's what General Story Stevens was talking about. We pulled everything together, and we got the resources we needed because we did that, okay? And this kind of shows you what was happening with Army aviation development from the 70s to when we took over. It was coming down. And this is a great book. The problem is I don't know where in the hell it's at anymore. I asked these guys in St. Louis, whatever happened to this 6 years of excellence about the Aviation Research and Development Command? So far, nobody's been able to find it. I don't know. But you see the dip here and where we turned the corner back up on the right side there? And that's why we were allowed to do research and development. Then it fell down again. And I remember Bill Lewis calling me. What was the guy that was the tech director down there? And I showed in that chart, and he said, how did you guys ever do that? You remember that, Bill? This chart right here? He asked Bill, he said, how come you guys could get all that money, you know? And Bill says, well, you know, we're kind of organized to do that. So they did form the ADD, and that started, the problem is you got to continue it. You can't have a peak here and then let things go to pot for 5 years, and it doesn't work. But that's part of a bureaucracy, okay? So anyway, I'm going to flip through this real fast and kind of close it out. This is the book 3 that I'm working on. Tom Thompson, any know Tom Thompson by chance? Tom Thompson's over here. He's the chief aeromechanics engineer for the Army Aviation over in Huntsville. The guy down below is General McConville. He was chief of staff. He just stepped down last year. He came down and gave me a big plaque, and there's a video on my website of him saying that I was the best professor he ever had, okay? And in there, he was on the winning design team in 1990, and he holds up the book. He's very proud. It was for a light utility. The other guy, Dean Borgman, remember I told you the guy that moved? He went out to Hughes, and he was giving it to the team. Which one, the top one points to the arrow?
Yeah, the top one with the red line.
You sure? The very top one?
this one right here, that red one right there.
Oh, that one right
Yeah,
there. Okay,
yeah,
I see it now.
yeah.
I see it. This is the General McConville right here. This guy made Lieutenant General. I was there for 35 years. We had 7 astronauts, sent 50 people to the military academy to teach, 7 generals. You know, he was the 4-star, some 3-star generals. So there's a whole connectivity back to that. And what we did to build this was use this approach up here, because when I came there in 1984, there was an aeronautics school. You know, they had some courses. And they hadn't hired a new professor, full professor. So I get there, and Dukoff was the chair, and Robin was the associate chair. And they said, we want you to help build this into an aerospace school, you see? Because basically, you know, it was called aerospace, but it was mostly aeronautics. So we went and recruited. I got Dave Peters to come down there. I got Dewey Hodges to come down there. I got all these guys to come down there. And so we were successful, and this kind of shows it up here where we used something in the 90s called integrated product and process development, which was kind of the concurrent engineering that was required for defense programs. So we built this methodology of how you make these trades, but we expanded it beyond the rotary wing, the fixed wing, the spacecraft. There's a guy named Dr. Dmitry Mavris, who is one of our graduate students. We formed the Aerospace Systems Design Laboratory. I was the director, but I was doing a lot of other things. He has grown that director to the biggest of its kind in the world. He's got 300 graduate students. He's got 100 research engineers, okay? And it's amazing. A week ago before I came here, they have their annual external advisory board. They had people from all over the world. They had the Air Force, they had NASA, they had Navy, and everybody there. And so that's, you know, that was, he's something else, okay? This is the chapter, the book 3 I'm starting to write. I'm doing it in 5-year increments. You can see I was there 35 years, and each 5 years we kind of moved into another area and expanded what we were doing, you see? So it starts off in 1984 to 89. We developed that, and then 90 to 94. We did a lot of autonomous vehicle work in the early 2000s that nobody has duplicated today about reconfigurability in flight with all those kinds of stuff. We did some neat stuff, but we did some of that stuff. And then this is the book 2, and that was the symbol. When they put the Aviation Research and Development Command back with the Troops Command, they had a symbol. I didn't like the symbol very well. I liked the one with the other one on it, but I was gone. And General Keith, for instance, was a guy who put the readiness back with the R&D labs and center because it wasn't working. You got to have talent. You got to have engineering talent, whether it's in research and development or whether it's modifications to aircraft. You got to have engineers that know what they're doing, you see. And so there's some stuff here. I'm just going to flip through this. I'll show this to Indra, because the first 10 years we dominated all the competitions, and then Maryland turned around. Of course, they got a professor from Russia to do it for them, but that's okay. But it's been a friendly. The design competitions have been really good, you know, over the years, and it's been very valuable to everybody to do that. Fixed wing spacecraft design methods. This is something I tried to preach here, because when you have something this big and it's an industry, you got to have a methodology that's going to pull things together. And basically that's systems engineering. Unfortunately, in academia, systems engineering is looked at a weak sister, right? But you look at what's happened in electric vehicles and avionics and everything else, somebody's got to be the integrator. So we had a program with Bill. Unfortunately, he had to cancel it, called Development Assurance Value-Based Acquisition, okay? And basically this, what this allowed us to do was, you see over here, the Air Force uses this. The Army, I don't know if they never read the best practices for DOD, but you can see you got system effectiveness over here on here, and then you've got life cycle cost, okay? And so basically, if you have a baseline, this is like a Black Hawk. Now, you want more capability, but you don't want to go too far this way. And so what we did was we developed the models you see, we'd take a UH-60 as it is and upgrade it, okay, so you could do those kinds of trades. And the whole thing about it is, we had University of Alabama, Huntsville, Dave Arterburn, you know him, he was on there. I also had Dassault Systems. We were doing digital engineering. Everybody says digital twin, all this engineering. We were doing this stuff 15 years ago. They ought to recognize that those are nice things, but in reality, it's about making decisions. And you got to do trade-offs, and you got to do it that way. So anyway, I think I'm going to quit because I don't want to take too much of your time. This is the chapters in this book too, which you can get on the web. I don't have any more to sell. They're all sold out. But basically, my returning from Vietnam, my experiences in Field Artillery Advanced Course, experience in athletics, aerospace engineer, picture of Georgia Tech, going to graduate school, going to those guys. Chapter 2, aeroelasticity, dynamics, vibrations engineer. Under those guys, that's what I became when I went to St. Louis and worked in the Mart building, which was downtown St. Louis. That's where I told you, Tom House and I, that Mart building's right up here. So if the St. Louis Cardinals had a day game, we'd sneak out and go down to the baseball game. Okay. Tom's a good guy. My books are always about the family as well. And one thing, when we moved to St. Louis, you know, we wanted to get a nice house. So, and it had to be close to where work was and had good schools. So we kind of followed this. This is my father. My father and mother were school teachers. And I spent growing up in little towns in southern Illinois. And then he finally came back to his hometown, St. Rose, okay? Unfortunately, when we were moving to St. Louis from after graduate school, he passed away. He had a brain tumor. He was only 61 years old. That was kind of sad. So anyway, there's a book that's been put out in 2014 called the Army Aviation Foundations, and I contributed to that along with Tom House and then a lot of people from industry. Half of it's bullshit, if you want to know the truth. And when it comes to the Apache, I can tell you that there was a problem. The CH-47Ds had a lot of problems too. But this is General Crosby. He was a PEO and thanked me for all my contributions that I made to Army Aviation and to some. So I think you can get this book. It won't tell you everything, but for $42.50 you can get it. You get my book for $17, you're going to learn a hell of a lot more than's in that book. It's got prettier pictures though, you know, of the airplanes, okay? I think that's enough. There's some more chapters that go through there. So anyway, read the book. If you're interested, just go to my website. There's just some neat stuff on there. But anyway, it's been a long ride, you know, and I was a kind of guy that everybody asked me, well, how's things going? I said, I'm keeping busy. And I've been keeping busy for my whole life. And retirement, my wife said, you're retired now. What are you doing writing all these books? I said, I got a mission to fulfill. I got to cover these 3 careers. One thing that's very interesting about that first book about Vietnam, because when I was in Vietnam, we had a chance to win the Vietnam War in 1970. Because finally, we could go across the border to the sanctuaries. And I was part of a 150-ship helicopter airlifted a whole ARVN up the Mekong River because the North Vietnamese were cutting off Phnom Penh, the river, and everything else. Whereas the ground forces, there was General Abrams, who at that time was the commander, but he was an armor guy. He didn't know so much about air mobility and air warfare and things. But he said, man, when they started fleeing away, because they moved across the borders and could only go 15 kilometers, they started moving away. And he said, what an incomparable opportunity. If only I had another division. And I'm reading this, I said, shit, we just took one division up the Mekong River. We got another ARVN division that can come, and you come behind them. And then you take your armor forces, and they could have captured 40,000 troops. They could 3 different headquarters. The war would have been over in 1970. The reason I'm doing this, I'm a Vietnam helicopter veteran and all this, and I go to all these things. Nobody says how you could win the war. So I kind of hint about that in that first book. I get a call from Hollywood, and they want to make a movie about it. And I'm starting on my second book. And I said, I really got to, I talked to all these veterans associations about how the war could be won. And if you go to my website, I kind of show a little formula on how it could have been won, that part of it. So I don't want to keep anybody else, but I thought it was good to give you an overview of that. Okay?